is the thing that is making a lot of news is about Macron's withdrawal from Niger. What does it mean for the world? How do you assess international power dynamic in the region now? Now they are pulling out their ambassador, 1,500 troops there. And the biggest thing what we want to understand for, especially for this part of the world, Irina, is that why only France? Why not US? It has also got 1,000 troops there.
So let's start with the fact that Macron is being asked to leave. It's not that he's terminating the alliance, it's that his announcement is a belated reaction to the development that happened weeks ago when Niger essentially kicked the French out and terminated diplomatic and military relations after a coup displaced the elected government with a junta of military personnel that was responding to popular pressure fueled in part by Russian propaganda, but largely anti-colonialist in nature, that has blamed France for unequal treatment, taking advantage of Niger economically, and essentially was calling for decolonization from France. And France, unlike the United States, has had a long-term colonial presence and post-colonial presence across West Africa. And for the past couple of years, there's been a number of coups and attempted coups, eventually leading to anti-colonialist, anti-French regimes displacing pro-French regimes. So the US is actually there as part of a counterterrorism contingency, but they do not have significant political involvement. They did promise humanitarian and security aid to countries that are combating terrorism and that are resisting the Russian entry into the political scene, but they have actually been criticized for being involved insufficiently in African affairs, which is a fair criticism, but what they cannot be blamed for is having any sort of colonial presence simply because they were not there historically or politically. But it's not just the French who are getting kicked out. Actually, the UN peacekeepers were also asked to leave, and 12,000 members of the peacekeeping forces were asked to leave in a lead up to the removal of the French troops, and that was a major red flag. Everyone claims to have been caught by surprise regarding the coup, but these measures that were leading up to those events should have pointed out where the general direction of this whole situation. So that leaves a very complicated situation on the ground. The French have had a very mixed history in the region. On the one hand, they themselves favored particular families and interests in governments, and they were involved in a lot of political corruption. They were not invested in any sort of building up civil societies or local law and order, and this has resulted in a very unequal situation on the ground. On the other hand, they were effective in terms of combating counterterrorism troops, and without their presence, we are seeing already a proliferation of jihadist threats, separatism, and a lot of opposition to Wagner and to local governments. And some of the separatists don't really care who is in power. They care about their own interests, which are not being observed by either party. And there's also a dangerous combination of counter-coup forces and separatists joining forces with some of the jihadist organizations such as Al-Qaeda in opposing governments and trying to kick the governments out of the territories they are claiming for themselves, and also opposing Wagner's presence. There's a big potential for a regional instability and war. These societies are very tribal. They don't necessarily care as much about national borders as about family and tribal affiliations and interests. So we can see a lot of border skirmishes and tribal movement back and forth, and it's all going in a very unclear direction.
Right. For the outside world, what is it that the France has been there? Is it the uranium deposits that is there? And after so many years of being there, the Niger is the world heavily indebted poor countries. It comes under that, and that is why a lot of people, there is a popular support to the coup itself, that a lot of people think that the civilian leadership which was in power till now, they have not delivered, and now whoever is in power, let's at least they will bring better life for them. How does this work? A lot of countries down in that region are having coups, and military governments are getting installed.
So there's some truth to the fact that uranium was a major interest of France in the region. France is heavily reliant on civilian nuclear technology for its electrification process, and uranium is Niger is very rich in uranium, and part of the problem was the disagreement between the public and the government and France over the price fixing, because the population was unhappy with the deal that Niger was getting out of the French. They wanted more of a partnership and less of a France taking a monopoly attitude towards this. So that was one practical source of dissatisfaction. A lot of it was about optics and history, not necessarily current events, because France is no longer controlling the country, but the local currencies are very responsive to the French influence, and no one particularly cared for the French meddling in local politics. The fact that France was actively backing particular families and interests, regardless of the outcome, was seen as inappropriate political influence. The irony is that the new government is very much doing the same with the help of Wagner. It has displaced the government without any elections whatsoever. It did not wait for new elections to bring itself into a position, and in the 2 years the last administration was in place, yes, it is true that many things were continued to be mismanaged, but it is also true that there was progress on counter-terrorism front, and now this populist push for a change is not taking external and other threats into consideration. So this is not going to necessarily solve all the problems. Yes, they got rid of France, but Russia has a very similar, if not worse, attitude. It has been more successful in corrupting governments, which is how it now ended up in this position of being asked to enter the country. But it's still corruption, even if it's a better managed corruption with more favorable optics.